The Great Emu War. Some may think of it as an absurdity, but we here at National Geographic assure that this very real historical event had unprecedented effects on the history of Australia, perhaps even the entire world.
I'm Dr. Lucas Scheitz, and today we examine this story of utter incompetence and technological advancement. This is the Great Emu War.
After the events of World War I, the Great Depression hit the world hard, but there was no nation it hit harder than Australia. Australian veterans that fought in the war, and even some British veterans, were given land for farming in the western half of Australia. For these men, life hit them unbearably hard.
The thing you have to understand about the Australian outback is that it is full of desert. Well, desert is not very good for farming. On top of that, these farmers, they were being overworked by the government and they were not receiving the financial support that they were promised. So life really was hard for these men. In fact, some of them left the farms entirely to work in the city.
But those who remained, nothing could prepare them for the horrors they were about to experience. Emus. Australia's national bird, a flightless creature similar to the ostrich. They can grow up to 6 feet tall, weigh up to 120 pounds, and run up to 40 miles an hour.
These here emus, they are a real interesting creature because their behavioral patterns you see, after their breeding season, they usually migrate down south. But in the fall of 1932, they suddenly found Western Australia filled with lush, wet farmland, which naturally caused some confusion in the emus' behavioral patterns.
As if that weren't enough, the lush farmland provided the emus with a large quantity of wheat crops, making them a prime target for the giant birds. They were easily able to break through the wooden fences and start devouring the crops. This was the breaking point for the farmers of Australia. Something had to be done. But instead of going to the Minister of Agriculture, these farmers, who you must remember are military veterans, consulted the Minister of Defense, George Pearce.
At the time these incidents occurred with the emu, Dr. George Pearce was in the fourth run as Minister of Defense. And that puzzles me because he was such a terrible person. In fact, he wanted to make feather hats from the emus. It's true. It was the main reason why he agreed to the farmers' demands.
And so, with Pearce's approval, a small military force was sent into Western Australia. And we mean small. The team only consisted of 3 men, the leader of whom was Major G.P.W. Meredith. And they were only supplied with 2 Lewis guns and about 10,000 rounds of ammunition. On the 2nd of November, 1932, the men spotted about 50 emus near the settlement of Campion and opened fire. However, the birds were out of range and thus able to employ evasive maneuvers and escape. 2 days later, on the 4th of November, the men set up at a nearby dam to prepare an ambush for the emus.
Now maybe it was just dumb luck. My professional opinion is that these here emus are magic. Though for the guns jumped about only 12 out of 1,000 birds were killed, only them to escape once again.
This defeat was a disaster for the Australian men, and nothing they did seemed to sway the war towards their favour. They returned to the cities in shame, but the farmers demanded they continue their offensive. Their second outgoing was slightly more successful, but in the end the solution was much simpler.
Well, as it turned out, they didn't have to declare war on the emus at all. The solution to the emu crisis was, at the end of the day, to build better fences out of metal instead of wood, which could withstand and properly keep them out. And so we can conclude that the Great Emu War was, in fact, entirely pointless.
And now to wrap things up, we take you to Australia to inquire the humble citizens about the war's great legacy. Oh, excuse me, sir. Can you tell me about
Oi, mate, you don't sound like an Aussie or a Kiwi. Who are you?
Well, I'm an Englishman, sir. Dr. Lucas Scheitz, and I'm here to talk to you about history.
Oh, you're doing a documentary here?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm Jameson Patrick, sir. What can I do you for?
Well, I was wondering if you could tell us about the Great Emu War.
The what?
The Great Emu War.
What's that?
It was fought here in Australia in the 1930s.
You're making this up. You gotta be making this up.
I am not, Jameson.
Well, it's a war that was fought with emus. Seems pretty self-explanatory to me.
I would have at least thought you had a little more information considering you are in Australia.
So you think just because I'm Australian, I know everything about Australian history? Well, I know a lot about English history, piker.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I know about all the horrible things you folks did to everyone else. You tried to use Australia as a prison for decades.
No, we're getting
Literally
this off topic
decades.
here.
You tried to tax the Americans without representation in your little parliament.
No.
And don't even get me started on India.
All right,
I
cut
could
the
go
camera.
on all day, mate.
Cut the
Where
camera.
you going?
Cut the camera.